Let's be clear about something. Medieval castles were freezing. Not the grab a spare blanket kind of cold, but the see your breath indoors kind. These were massive stone fortresses built for defense, not for comfort. There was no central heating, no radiators, and definitely no soft feather duvets. So how did anyone cope? How did people in these drafty, icy strongholds manage to make it through the night without becoming blocks of ice? Today, we're stepping back into those cold halls to discover how medieval people managed to endure the chill. They made it through the night, but barely. When we imagine castles, we often see glowing candlelight on tapestries, banquets in echoing halls, and nobles wrapped in furs. The reality was much harsher. Castles were miserably uncomfortable once night fell, especially in the colder months. Behind the massive walls was a chill worse than a winter forest. No insulation, no glass windows, just raw stone, long corridors, and wind whistling through cracks like a warning. Sleeping inside a castle wasn't cozy, it was survival. And keeping warm mattered almost as much as keeping enemies away. The first issue was the material itself, stone. Castles were built with it for a reason. It resisted fire. It was strong, reliable, and nearly indestructible in battle. But stone was terrible at keeping warmth. Unlike wood or clay walls, it soaked up cold and held onto it for days. Even a roaring fire could only provide warmth while it lasted. Picture yourself inside, 10-foot thick walls closing you in, towering ceilings above, tiny window slits, no rugs, no insulation, just bare rock reflecting the damp chill back at you. And the building design made things worse. Great halls were vast, empty spaces. Bedrooms sat high up in towers, exposed to howling winds. Spiral staircases funneled drafts like chimneys. The only defenses against freezing air were thick doors and wall hangings, if you could afford them. Castles were built to repel armies, not to keep warmth trapped inside. The layout itself encouraged cold. Rooms were connected, allowing air to slip through everywhere. Courtyards sat open to the sky, pulling wind into the heart of the fortress. So at night, once fires went out, the cold crept in like an unseen enemy, inescapable and everywhere. The main source of heat was the hearth. That meant a big fireplace, or for poorer folks, a simple pit in the middle of the floor. These weren't efficient. They gave uneven heat, filled rooms with smoke, and couldn't handle 20-foot ceilings. Before the 12th century, chimneys weren't even common. Smoke just drifted upward, finding its way through cracks in the roof or lingering inside. The wealthy had private chamber hearths in their rooms, but most people did without. Servants often slept in bare passageways or tiny side rooms without a fire. Another option was a brazier, a metal pan of hot coals. Braziers gave some warmth, but also risked disaster. Sparks could set things alight. Burns were common. And then came the smoke. Many didn't die from cold, but from poisonous fumes filling poorly ventilated chambers. Yet for a while, the glowing coals offered enough heat to loosen your boots and wait for morning. But the real secret weapon against icy nights wasn't fire, it was the curtained bed. Those heavy four-posters weren't just decorative, they were practical. Think of them as indoor tents, wrapped in layers of fabric. At night, the drapes were drawn, trapping heat inside. The body warmth of you and often someone else stayed enclosed, creating a cocoon of relative warmth. The rich improved this design. Curtains were lined with fur or wool. Felted blankets as heavy as rugs added extra insulation. Beds were lifted high off the floor to avoid ground-level drafts. Mattresses stuffed with straw or feathers kept warmth and stayed dry. People often slept together. Families piled into one bed. Children curled up with siblings. Servants huddled with other servants. Heat meant more than privacy. No one sprawled out. Everyone curled tight, knees bent, arms tucked in. It wasn't comfortable, it was containment. And once inside, you stayed there until the first light of day. Let's get one thing straight. Spending a night in a castle wasn't something you managed on your own, especially if you belonged to the upper classes. That's where the night servants came in. These attendants had a single mission: make sure their lord or lady didn't freeze. And the methods they used were both resourceful and demanding. Their work started hours before anyone lay down. A servant would prepare the chamber, hauling in coals, setting a brazier in place, and lighting the fire. Bedstones were heated in the flames, then tucked into mattresses to warm them up. They boiled water and poured it into metal containers or clay jars, wrapped in cloth, and slipped them under the covers like primitive hot water bottles. Blankets were layered thick wool. Sometimes fur-wool sheets were shaken out, and extra covers folded neatly at the foot. And their duty didn't end when their master went to sleep. They often remained in the room through the night, half dozing in a chair. Why? To feed the brazier, stoke the fire, refill bottles with hot water, or fetch an extra blanket when their lord stirred. For them, the night shift had just begun. Even nobles suffered from the cold coughs, aching joints, lingering fevers. The cure wasn't medicine. It was an attentive servant with warm rocks and spiced wine. Noble women sometimes used warming stools, wooden frames fitted with iron pans of glowing embers, which they perched on while reading or praying. Others swaddled their legs in sheepskin wraps or wore fur-lined boots kept at their bedside. In truth, the comfort of one noble depended on the effort of several servants. You might assume aristocrats had it easy, wrapped in luxury. And while they did enjoy larger beds, thicker blankets, and private fires, there was a catch. Their chambers were usually in the upper towers. These rooms sat higher, far from the ground's natural warmth, exposed to winds, and fitted with wide windows meant to display wealth. But those windows weren't glassed. At best, they had shutters or thin oiled linen. So even with fires lit and servants on watch, the cold still invaded sometimes, worse than in the cramped quarters below. Ordinary servants, squires, or kitchen boys often slept in warmer spots, near the kitchen fires, in basements, or deep in the inner castle, where heat lingered in the stone. Some even curled up with animals in the stables, since body heat from livestock was better than nothing. Comfort didn't always match rank. In castles, warmth depended on where you slept, not how rich you were. That's the irony cold ignored status. It crept through walls, under doors, and into every chamber, unless you were lucky enough to be near a bakery hearth. Now consider the hardest role of all, the watchmen. The guards, the men on the ramparts, the ones posted at gates or towers. These weren't shining knights in armor. More often, they were half-fed boys in patched cloaks, wrapped in layers of rough wool. Their job was brutal: stay awake, stay alive, don't abandon post. They trudged along the battlements, sat shivering on stone ledges, and let icy winds whip across their faces. There were no beds, no blankets, sometimes not even torches. How did they endure? They kept moving. They stamped their feet, clapped their hands, huddled close like birds on a branch. Some chewed strong herbs to stay awake. Others whispered prayers to keep themselves focused, longing for dawn. In some places, guards rotated shifts every 2 hours. In others, they endured until ordered down. A few castles kept firepots for the watch, but carrying them up winding staircases was difficult and dangerous. Many relied on hot stones tucked under cloaks. Some carried flasks of spiced ale or wine, not for warmth, but to dull the misery. If a guard fell asleep, the punishment could be severe. For them, cold wasn't discomfort. It was a test of endurance, and failure could doom the whole castle. So how did anyone sleep in a medieval fortress without freezing? The truth, barely. Comfort wasn't the goal. People slept huddled together, hidden behind bed curtains, or curled by the kitchen fire. They lived with smoky hearths, scalding stones, and endless layers of cloth. They leaned on servants, animals, and each other just to survive. And still, winter claimed lives. Fevers became fatal. The weak succumbed to exposure. And in a castle, exposure often meant death. Yet humanity endured. People adapted. They wrapped themselves in wool and fur, trusted in rituals and customs, and handed down survival tricks through generations, one frozen night at a time. So the next time you adjust a thermostat or pull up a blanket, remember once upon a time, someone lay awake on stone floors, with frost in their lungs and smoke in their eyes. And they survived, not because they were comfortable, but because they refused to give in. And sometimes, that's all it takes.